Good evening. Well, I was eating my dinner and Jay signed off, and I was on a minute lag listening to the show, sitting there enjoying the show, hoping I'd get a couple more bites in, and he signed off. And I'm like, as soon as I hear him, well, I'm going to sign off now, I'm like, oh no, that was a minute ago. Anyway, hello there. All right, my name is Stephen D. Kelly. This is the Stephen D. Kelly Show. It's almost 7 p.m. I was going to play some music between the break, but I was trying to put that together right when he signed off, so I guess I didn't get it up quick enough. Anyway, I apologize for the dead air, but it is almost 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. here in California. That would be 10 p.m. there on the East Coast, but it is September 1st. And the title of the show tonight is Falun Gong is Good. Now, there's a few reasons why I chose this subject, and I'm going to get into that. Oh, look at that. It's so early, even Grace is uncovered. All right, everybody's got to deal with Grace. Anyway, I should also mention before I get started that this is Truth Cat Radio that you're listening to, www.truthcatradio.com. Thank you very much. And we do apologize for any growing pains and issues that you may have experienced, but we're very happy to have you here with us. And also, I want to remind you to join the chat room. If you're listening and you have not joined the chat room, please, it's just one button to click, and you have to enter your a name, but that's no big deal. And then I get to see you, and I'm very happy to be able to communicate. And you can communicate with some of the other people that are already there, and if you have any questions, that's one way to be able to get in have something to say without really having to call in. If you do want to call in, assuming that's going to be working, it was working last show, although nobody called in, I'd be happy to take your calls, and that is at 714-598-3125. Again, assuming that works. Otherwise, you'll have to connect to me via Skype, which is my name, Stephen D. Kelly, D being a middle initial, of course, and there is a period on either side of the initial. Of course, Grace wants to make noise right now. All right, anyway, back to the Falun Gong. All right, so what exactly is the Falun Gong, first of all? All right, now I talk about Qi, energy, and we work a lot with the trying to increase our energies and what have you. And very often these concepts have a Eastern basis, at least as far as the ones that are popular to be discussed today. Obviously, the concepts are not strictly from China per se or the Orient, but I suppose the Hindus have very similar belief systems. Well, with their concepts of prana, the use of prana is very similar to the use of qi that's more common with the Chinese people. But qi is also known in other forms, and of course the Europeans have different ways of describing it, as well as the Christians, of course, describe it in different ways. Every culture describes it in a different way, but essentially it is qi, organ, energy, whatever. Now, qi, of course, as we've discussed, as I have discussed, has a male and a female component and travels in two directions, and there's all sorts of mechanics as far as the energy movement. But for the sake of dwelling with the concepts as understood by the ancient humans, the ones that were responsible for developing these the Buddhist concepts and these things of this nature, I think that we're going to be able to show a connection. Grace is over there mocking me for some reason. I'm not sure what that's all about. Anyway, now, very often these things are associated with the martial arts, and this is one of the key words or the key ways of seeing where this is abused, potentially. And the reason of this is because the flow of energy through your body also has to do with the flow of intelligence. And having a flow and maintaining a constant flow is really what you endeavor to do. And you also endeavor to have a flow that is always balanced. It's moving upward as well as downward in the same amount. You don't want to have it only moving upwards or only moving downwards. When we do healing with methods like Reiki, which of course has a Asian aspect also, we actually use the male energy. Yes, which is the energy that moves downward from the cosmos, if you will. Energy that comes from the earth and moves upwards through the body, we associate it with the female energy. Now, it's very important to say very quickly that there is no negative or positive with respect to a connection to good or evil or good or bad, this sort of thing. This is no different than the connection on a battery, which has one side is plus and one side is minus. It's just the natural movement. So we cannot say that the minus side of the battery is the evil side of the battery. We should only use the good side. It's foolish. But what is important is the balance and the flow. Having it build up, having the energy moving in one direction, the direction it shouldn't be moving, or the only direction it's moving, but then build it continuing to move and then not being expelled, that would be explosive. And very often when this energy is used in martial arts, that's exactly what they're doing. They are building up the energy, only instead of having it flow in equal directions in both up and down, they build up the energy in the upward direction, the female direction, and they block it in their central chakra, and they hold it there and they concentrate it, and then they release it, usually through the hands. And this, of course, can be described several ways. Touch of death. Of course, we see this sort of thing stylized in video games and kung fu movies, but this is a real thing. But the bottom line is it's not good for several reasons. One, it is destructive, and two, it is certainly offensive. And it is bottling up of the energy, compressing it, that is completely stopping the flow, and it is also forcing the flow into to maximize in the wrong direction. Very similar to what you do when you maximize the Merkaba. The Merkaba works the same way. So those things are just basics to understand about the nature of this energy before we dive into the Falun Gong. Now, one thing I do want to say is that in spite of the persecution and the ostracism and what I would suspect the potential negative effect of this group on modern Western society, as well as the current communist regime in China, I'm surprised to say that the Wikipedia information on Falun Gong, F-A-L-U-N, Gong, G-U-N, I'm sorry, G-O-N-G, is actually very accurate. I was expecting to have some sort of a whitewashed version that would perhaps demonize these people and suggest that the stance being taken by the Chinese government would be righteous. Not only do they actually represent this group in a objective and accurate way, but they actually also represent the Chinese government's response in a accurate way. So, for the sake of brevity, I suppose, I mean, I could certainly just spew at length, but I'm actually going to read from the Wikipedia a little bit as best as I can, going, over the various little things in parentheses, what have you. And I think that should work really well as far as providing all of the answers to what exactly this group is, who founded it, what they do, what they believe, and why they're being persecuted today. And of course, the only reason that I am doing this show is because I did learn about this information some time ago. I did study it back in the early, the late 90s, if you will, when this information or this group first appeared. And this was my first real exposure to a little more complex Buddhist beliefs and concepts of Qigong, and it was worthwhile. But at the same time, I was able to watch in real time what happened when they tried to essentially use the power of meditation to put out good intentions to the leaders of the communist Chinese government. Now, I'll say one thing about the Wikipedia story here that I'm going to read is that when they talk about that particular event, they play it as more of a a protest, and they make it seem like there was some sort of something other than a mass meditation going on. But I remember clearly, even when the story was being publicized in the newspapers when it was actually happening, that they described it as an actual mass meditation to put out good intentions and love to the leadership of the Communist Party there in Beijing. And of course, what happened after that resulted in the arrest, incarceration, torture, and murder of thousands of these people. At least 10,000 people were arrested. And since then, these people have been persecuted, and horrible things have been done, and they're actually feeding the organ trade, or the black market organ trade, that is a major part of the Chinese country. Funny that is, but Wikipedia actually talks about that. So again, the name of the show is Falun Gong is Good. Okay, now Falun Gong is also referred to as Falun Dafa, D-A-F-A. And it literally means, in Chinese, standard Mandarin Chinese, Dharma wheel practice, or law wheel practice. I'll explain what they mean by the wheel, because that's one aspect of the Wikipedia that they don't really talk about, because it involves what we call a swastika. A swastika is actually a Falun. How about that, huh? The name of the religion is actually associated with that emblem. The emblem is very prominently featured in their the symbol is actually very prominently featured in their emblem, the same emblem that you see on either side of the title that I displayed in the advertising. And it's also being used as the artwork for the video that you may be watching at this moment. Now, the law wheel practice, or the Dharma wheel practice, is a Chinese spiritual practice that combines meditation and Qigong exercises with a moral philosophy centered on the tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And of course, there's 3 Chinese symbols for those 3 words. And before I go any further, I'm going to explain to you something very important about this thing. If I can get Grace to be quiet. Grace, you're going to make me cover you? Now, truthfulness and compassion should be obvious. These are virtues that every human should have. Forbearance is also a virtue everyone should have, but what forbearance means, how I basically describe it, is you are responsible for understanding truth and reality, and it is not acceptable to ignore or to be ignorant. So forbearance is the responsibility of not being ignorant. And that's what we're doing when we talk about these things and learn about these things, is that we don't ignore anything we try to learn, and that we have a certain forbearance, and that's the understanding that it behooves us to do this, because ignorance is no excuse. The practice emphasizes morality and the cultivation of virtue, and identifies as a Qigong practice of the Buddhist school through its teachings, though its teachings also incorporate elements drawn from Taoist traditions. Through moral rectitude, and practice of meditation, practitioners of Falun Gong aspire to eliminate attachments and ultimately to achieve spiritual enlightenment. Obviously, in a consumer society, it's not a good thing when people aspire to eliminate attachments, because essentially that means possessions and worldly goods. Could be attachments to other people too. Spiritual enlightenment should be obvious. Falun Gong was first taught publicly in the northeast of China in 1992 by Li Hongzhi. Now, it emerged towards the end of China's Qigong boom, a period which saw the proliferation of similar practices of meditation, slow moving exercises and regulated breathing. Obviously, we've seen the people doing these things in the park, the Tai Chi. Now, it differs from other Qigong schools in its absence of fees or formal membership and lack of daily rituals of worship. Its greater emphasis on morality and the theological nature of its teachings. Western academics have described Falun Gong as a Qigong discipline, a quote-unquote spiritual movement, or a cultivation system in the tradition of Chinese antiquity, or as a form of Chinese religion. Now, although the practice initially enjoyed considerable support from the Chinese officialdom, by the mid to late 1990s, the Communist Party and public security organizations increasingly viewed Falun Gong as a potential threat. I should go cover the bird, huh? I'll give her another minute. Now, they viewed it as a potential threat because due to its size and its independence from the state and spiritual teachings. By 1990, the government estimated that there were about 70 million practitioners of Falun Gong. Tensions culminated in April 1999 when over 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners gathered peacefully near the central government compound in Beijing to request legal recognition and freedom from state interference. This demonstration is widely seen as catalyzing the persecution that followed. Now, as I said, I don't believe that's true. I don't believe they challenged the government in any way. I think that may have came out of the discussions, but I think their real intention was to project and meditate and send the intentions to the leadership. Perhaps those were the intentions that they were meditating. All right, hang on. I'm going to go cover the bird. Geez, on top of that, I just ate, and it feels like I got food in my mouth. Excuse me. Okay, so that's what happened. This happened in April of 1999. That was the big deal. This is when a lot of people even learned about them. They came onto the radar, so to speak. That's probably when I actually learned about them. Would be my guess. But on the 20th of July, 1999, the Communist Party leadership initiated a nationwide crackdown and a multifaceted propaganda campaign intended to eradicate the practice. It blocked internet access to the websites that mentioned Falun Gong, and in October 1999, it declared Falun Gong a heretical organization that threatened social stability. Falun Gong practitioners in China are reportedly subject to a wide range of human rights abuses. Reportedly, yes, they are. Hundreds of thousands are estimated to have been imprisoned extrajudicially, and practitioners in detention are subject to forced labor, psychiatric abuse, torture, and other coercive measures of thought reform at the hands of the Chinese authorities. And as of 2009, human rights groups estimated that at least 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners had died as the result of abuse in custody. Some observers put the number much higher and report that tens of thousands may have been killed to supply China's organ transplant industry. In the years since the persecution began, Falun Gong practitioners have become active in advocating for greater human rights in China. Falun Gong founder Li Hongzhi has lived in the United States since 1996, and Falun Gong has a sizable global constituency. Inside China, estimates suggest that tens of millions continue to practice Falun Gong in spite of the persecution. Hundreds of thousands are estimated to practice Falun Gong outside China in over 70 countries worldwide. I want to remind everybody that if you're interested and you'd like to call and ask a question, that you could give it a shot at 714-598-3125. Okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Falun Gong, exactly what it works, what they do. Well, let's start with the origins first. Now, Falun Gong is mostly identified with the Qigong movement in China, and Qigong is a modern term that refers to a variety of practices involving slow movement, Tai Chi, meditation, and regulated breathing. Now, Qigong exercises have historically been practiced by the Buddhist monks, Taoist martial artists, and Confucian scholars as a means of spiritual, moral, and physical refinement. The modern Qigong movement emerged in the early 1950s, when communist cadres embraced the technique as a way to improve health. The new term was constructed to avoid association with religious practices which were prone to being labeled as feudal superstition and persecuted during the Maoist era. Now, early adopters of Qigong eschewed its religious overtones in regarding Qigong principally as a branch of Chinese medicine. And in the late 1970s, Chinese scientists purported to have discovered the material existence of the qi or qi energy in which Qigong seeks to harness. Now, in the spiritual vacuum of the post-Mao era, tens of millions of mostly urban and elderly Chinese citizens took up the practice of Qigong, and a variety of charismatic Qigong masters established practices. At one time, there were over 2,000 disciplines of Qigong that were being taught. The state-run China Qigong Science Research, CQRS, Science Research Society, was established in 1985 to oversee and administer the movement. Figures. Now, on the 13th of May, 1992, Li Hongzhi gave his first public appearance on Falun Gong, alternately called Falun Dafa, in the northeastern city of Changchun. Now, it is Li Hongzhi is said to have been taught ways of cultivation practice by several masters of the Buddhist and Taoist transition, including Guanju, the 10th heir to the Great Law Buddhist School and master of the Great Way School, with the Taoist alias of True Taoist from the Changbai Mountains. Now, Falun Dafa is said to be a result of his reorganizing and writing down the teachings that were passed to him. Li presented Falun Gong as part of a century-old tradition of cultivation, and in an effort sought to relieve the religious and spiritual elements of the Qigong practice that had been discarded in the earlier communist era. Now, Lee redefined his method as having an entirely different objective from Qigong. The purpose of practice should be neither physical health nor the development of extraordinary powers, but to purify one's heart and enjoy and attain spiritual salvation. Now, what the hell is wrong with that? See, they're just saying this is not about your health. This is about morality, virtue, and spiritual salvation. Now, Falun Gong is distinct from other Qigong schools in that its teachings cover a wide range of spiritual and metaphysical topics, placing emphasis on morality and virtue, and elaborating a complete cosmology. The practice identifies with a Buddhist school, but also draws on concepts and language found in Taoism and Confucianism. This has led some scholars to label the practice as a syncretic phase. Now, as I mentioned, they're not going to say anything about the Falun. I really doubt. But either way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue with the teachings and see if this coincides, and if I need to, I will add, because a lot of it involves social texts. They do mention the symbols in like a very short thing here, and they mention the swastika very briefly. And I know from my earlier studies that a lot of this has to do with the implantation of the Falun into the practitioner. This is usually done by the master, of course, Li Hongzhi, and he essentially, it's very similar to what we do in Reiki, where the Reiki master basically does what we call an attunement on the initiate, and the attunement requires the use of certain symbols and intentions, and it can be a very powerful experience, but it also is something that you cannot say you're a Reiki practitioner unless you've had this done. So I should mention that if you're ever trying to learn something like that and they try to sell it to you over the internet, it's not real. You do need to have your, goodness gracious, you do. It's funny, people are trying to talk to me when I'm doing a show. It's crazy. I can't look at that. Wow. But that was a total distraction. Excuse me. But again, and I'll read of course, I'm going to go into the exercise a little bit, but one of the things that I found that was very interesting about what Li Hongzhi was doing with his practitioners is he would install what he called this wheel. And of course, obviously, this wheel is very, very critical to the entire belief system, because obviously, if you look at the name, it's how as they say, the wheel of law, or the Dharma wheel. And it goes in two directions, basically. And what it is, of course, it is a swastika. Now, if you look at the swastika, of course, goes two different ways. The Nazis used one that went in the opposite direction of what is typically used by the Buddhist or even the American Indians were using this symbol. And the symbol isn't really a flat thing as you would look at like in a portrait thing. Usually the symbol is a wheel that is, you imagine, inside of your body, usually in the midsection, your stomach area. And this, of course, is the hara, or where your energy center is anyway. As they say, Japanese, of course, hara is Japanese. But the wheel is put into the body through an intention, and that person carries it, and it's spinning all the time. But what happens with the swastika is it actually spins in two different directions. It spins for so long in one direction, and spins then stops and spins in the opposite direction. I believe it's like 20 minutes one way, 20 minutes the other, continuously, and this happens for the rest of your life. Now, if you imagine a swastika spinning, and in this case, the swastika is like a water wheel. If you could imagine the cups on on a water wheel of a mill, perhaps. And as the thing spins around in one direction, it actually gathers the energy, is the concept. And as it spins in the other direction, it gives off the energy. So the practice is to have a constant taking in and giving out of the energy. You're not just taking in, you're also giving out. But this is what actually is supposed to be working with the people. So the exercises, let me just talk briefly about the exercises, but they basically consist of 4 standing exercises and 1 sitting position. And the exercise was regarded as secondary to moral elevation, though still essential. Excuse me. Obviously, truth, compassion, and forbearance has nothing to do with exercise. But these help the chi flow. That's really the concept of why you do it. The first exercise is called Buddha Stretching 1,000 Arms, which are intended to facilitate the free flow of energy through the body and open up the meridians. The second exercise, a Falun standing stance, involves holding 4 static poses, each of which resemble holding a wheel for an extended period. The objective of this exercise is to enhance wisdom, increase strength, raise a person's level, and strengthen divine powers. The third, penetrating the cosmic extremes, involves 3 sets of movements which aim to enable the expulsion of bad energy, bad chi, and the absorption of good energy into the body. Through practice of this exercise, the practitioner aspires to cleanse and purify the body. The fourth exercise, Falun Cosmic Orbit, seeks to circulate energy freely throughout the body. Unlike the first through fourth exercises, the fifth exercise is performed in a seated lotus position called reinforcing supernatural powers. It is a meditation intended to be maintained as long as possible. Falun Gong exercises can be practiced individually or in group settings and can be performed for varying lengths of time in accordance with the needs and abilities of the individual practitioner. Falun Gong practitioners are encouraged to read Falun Gong books and practice its exercises on a regular basis, preferably daily. Falun Gong exercises are practiced in group settings in parks, university campuses, and other public places in over 70 countries worldwide, and are taught for free by volunteers. Now, me personally, I've always seen the guys doing Qigong, or not Qigong, but Tai Chi. I gotta wonder how many of these people may be doing Falun Gong. More than likely, they're just doing Tai Chi. Now, in addition to the 5 exercises, in 2001, another meditation activity was introduced called Sending Righteous Thoughts, which is intended to reduce persecution on the spiritual plane. Think about that. Sending righteous thoughts. These are intentions. This is what we do. This is what we endeavor to do, and this is why we are so scary, and this is why the Falun Gong, where the communist government tried to crush them with an iron fist, because they were so much in fear of the power of righteous thoughts, which is what we try to do with our words. A pilot study involving genomic profiling of 6 Falun Dafa practitioners indicated that changes in gene expression of practitioners, in contrast to normal healthy controls, were characterized by enhanced immunity, downregulation of cellular metabolism, and alteration of apotopic genes in favor of rapid resolution of inflammation. Now, in addition to the attainment of physical health, many Buddhist and Taoist meditation systems aspire to transform the physical body and cultivate a variety of supernatural capabilities, such as telepathy and divine sight. Discussion of supernatural skills also feature prominently in the Qigong movement, and the existence of these skills gained a level of mainstream acceptance in China's scientific community in the 1980s. Now, Falun Gong teachings hold that the practitioners can acquire supernatural skills through a combination of moral cultivation, meditation, and exercises. This is how we increase our psychic skills. These include, but are not limited to, precognition, clairaudience, telepathy, and divine sight. That's the opening of the third eye. However, Falun Gong stresses that these powers can only be developed as a result of moral practice and should not be pursued or casually displayed. Falun Gong teaches that you can take pride in one's abilities, but taking pride in one's abilities or the desire to show it off are marks of dangerous attachments. Lee warns his followers not to be distracted by the pursuit of such powers. Now, when I started building up my psychic skills, not to say that I didn't have it, but when I actually started pursuing it in a very strong way, the purpose was for battle. It was to achieve the ability to do battle with the enemy, which of course was the dark side. And ultimately, of course, that will probably still happen, but it was a movement, and this was of course their fault, and I'm sure they're very upset about it, but it was a movement away from weapons and human weapons of destruction and devices into the devices of our brain and our head and our spiritual abilities. And I thought to build those in order to do battle with the enemy. But, excuse me, as you come to realize, though, it is more noble to serve the victims than to defeat the oppressor. Now, Falun Gong differentiates itself from Buddhist monastic traditions in that it places great importance on participation in the secular world. Falun Gong practitioners are required to maintain regular jobs and family lives, to observe the laws and their respective governments, and are instructed not to distance themselves from society. An exception is made for Buddhist monks and nuns who are permitted to continue a monastic lifestyle while practicing Falun Gong. As part of its emphasis on ethical behavior, Falun Gong's teachings prescribe a strict personal morality for practitioners. They are expected to do good deeds and to act truthfully and conduct themselves with patience and forbearance when encountering difficulties. For instance, Lee stipulates that a practitioner of Falun Gong must not hit back when attacked, not talk back when insulted. In addition, they must abandon negative thoughts and behaviors such as greed, deception, jealousy, etc. The teachings contain injunctions against smoking and the consumption of alcohol, as these are considered addictions that are detrimental to health and mental clarity. Practitioners of Falun Gong are forbidden to kill living things, including animals, for the purpose of obtaining food, though they are not required to adopt a vegetarian diet. They're just not allowed to kill their own. In addition to these things, practitioners of Falun Gong must abandon a variety of worldly attachments and desires. In the course of cultivation practice, the students of Falun Gong aims to relinquish the pursuit of fame, monetary gain, sentimentality, and other entanglements. Lee's teachings repeatedly emphasize the emptiness of material pursuits. Although practitioners of Falun Gong are not encouraged to leave their jobs or eschew money, they are expected to give up the psychological attachment to these things. Similarly, sexual desire and lust are treated as attachments to be discarded. But Falun Gong students are still generally expected to marry and have families. All sexual relations outside the confinements of a monogamous heterosexual marriage are regarded as immoral. Sorry, guys, if you're gay or ladies. Although gays and lesbians may practice Falun Gong, homosexual conduct is said to generate karma and is therefore viewed as incompatible with the goals of the practice. Falun Gong's cosmology includes the belief that different ethnicities each have a correspondence to their own heavens, and that individuals of mixed race lose some aspect of this connection. Nonetheless, Lee maintains that being of mixed race does not affect a person's soul or hinder their ability to practice cultivation. The practice does not have any formal stance against interracial marriage, and Falun Gong practitioners have interracial children. The Falun Gong doctrine counsels against participation in political or social issues. Excessive interest in politics is viewed as an attachment to worldly power and influence, and Falun Gong aims for transcendence of such pursuits. According to Hu Ping, Falun Gong deals only with purifying the individual through exercise and does not touch on social or national concerns. It has not suggested or even intimated a model for social change. Many religions pursue social reform to some extent, but there is no such tendency evident in Falun Gong. How about that? Now, the symbol, of course, the main symbol is the Dharma wheel. I cannot pronounce what it's called in Sanskrit, but that's what a Falun is. It's a Dharma wheel. And it represents the turn of the wheel of Dharma, which means to preach, well, it's, oh, I'm sorry, that's a text. Uh-oh, somebody trying to talk to me? Goodness gracious. Another host trying to talk to me in the middle of my show. How silly. But anyway, it represents the universe. And it's conceptualized, of course, by a swastika, usually with 4 small swastikas around it. And these represent Buddha. And it usually also contains the yin and yang symbols of the Taoist tradition. Now, Lee situates that his teachings of Falun Gong amidst the Dharma ending period described in the Buddhist scriptures as an age of moral decline when the teachings of Buddhism would need to be rectified. The current era is described in Falun Gong's teaching as the period of Zheng Fa, which could be translated as to correct the Dharma, a time of cosmic transition and renewal. That certainly sounds like what we're going through right now. The process of Fa rectification is necessitated by the moral decline, degeneration of life in the universe. And the post-1990 context, the persecution of the Falun Gong by the Chinese government has come to be viewed as a tangible symbol of this moral decay. Through the process of Fa rectification, life will be reordered according to the moral and spiritual quality of each, with good people being saved and ascending to a higher spiritual plane, and bad ones being eliminated or cast down. In this paradigm, Li assumes the role of rectifying the Dharma by disseminating through his moral teachings. Some have described his rhetoric about the Fa rectification and providing salvation in the final period of last havoc as apocalyptic. Others argue that Li's teachings are better understood in the context of a Buddhist notion of the cycle of the Dharma, or the Buddhist law, and suggests that unlike apocalyptic groups in the West, Falun Gong does not fixate on death or the end of the world, and instead has a simple, innocuous, ethical message. Li Hongzhi does not discuss a time of reckoning, and has rejected predictions of an impending apocalypse in his teaching. Well, I hope that helps to explain to people that this is not bad. But again, those that I've been basically suggested I should allow some of the people who feel that it's evil to come on the show and explain to me why it's evil, but all I can think of is that would be like somebody from Israel trying to come to me and explain how how good the Zionists were. You just wouldn't get very, very far. Now, there's some history. I could go over. We've got 1992 to 1996, 96 to 99. A lot of stuff was happening. A lot of big protests. I probably will start with the persecution. And I want to, I don't know if there's any way to, I'll see if I can give you an idea of what the Chinese are trying to use as a rationale for this persecution. But obviously the persecution of these people really is the main reason for doing this show, because clearly since this has happened many years ago, many people have been systematically tortured and mutilated just for the horrible reason of wanting to become moral, good people and project righteous thoughts. Oh gosh, that's so horrible. On July 20th, 1999, security forces abducted and detained thousands of Falun Gong practitioners that they identified as leaders. 2 days later, on July 22nd, the People's Republic of China Ministry of Civil Affairs outlawed the Falun Dafa Research Society as an illegal organization engaged in illegal activities, advocating superstition and spreading fallacies, hoodwinking people, and inciting and creating disturbances and jeopardizing social stability. The same day, the Ministry of Public Security issued a circular forbidding citizens from practicing Falun Gong in groups, possessing Falun Gong's teachings, displaying Falun Gong banners or symbols, or protesting the ban. The ensuing campaign aimed to eradicate the group through a combination of propaganda, imprisonment, and coercive thought reforms of practitioners, sometimes resulting in death. In October 1999, 4 months after the ban, legislation was created to outlaw heterodox religions and sentence Falun Gong devotees to prison terms. Hundreds of thousands are estimated to have been imprisoned extrajudiciously, and practitioners in detention are reportedly subject to forced labor, psychiatric abuse, torture, and other coercive methods of thought reform at the hands of Chinese authorities. The U.S. State Department and Congressional Executive Commission on China cite estimates that as much as half of Chinese re-education through labor camp population is made up of Falun Gong practitioners. Estimates are that Falun Gong represents an average of 15 to 20% of the total Logai population, which includes re-education through labor camps as well as prisons and other forms of administrative detention. Former detainees of labor camp system have reported that Falun Gong practitioners are one of the largest groups of prisoners in some labor camp and prison facilities. They comprise the majority of detainees and are often said to receive the longest sentences and worst treatment. In 2013, a 2013 report by Amnesty International on labor re-education camps found that Falun Gong practitioners constituted an average from one-third, in some cases 100%, of the total population of certain camps. The campaign against Falun Gong extends to many aspects of society, including the media apparatus, police force, military, education system, and workplaces. An extra-constitutional body, the 610 Office, was created to oversee the effort. Human Rights Watch noted that families and workplaces were urged to cooperate with the government. Foreign observers have attempted to explain the party's rationale for banning Falun Gong as stemming from a variety of factors. These include Falun Gong's popularity, China's history of quasi-religious movements which turned into violent insurrections, its independence from the state and refusal to toe the party line, internal politics within the Communist Party, and Falun Gong's moral and spiritual content, which put it at odds with aspects of official Marxist ideology. Xinhua News Agency, the official news organization of the Communist Party, declared that Falun Gong is opposed to the Communist Party of China and central government, preaches idealism, theism, and feudal superstition. Xinhua also asserted that the so-called truth, kindness, and forbearance principle preached by Falun Gong has nothing in common with the socialist, ethical, and cultural progress we are striving to achieve, and argued that it was necessary to crush Falun Gong in order to preserve the vanguard role and purity of the Communist Party. Other articles appearing in the state-run media in the first days and weeks of the ban posted that Falun Gong must be defeated because its theist philosophy was at odds with the Marxist-Leninist paradigm and with the secular views of materialism. Xing Zhemin's campaign against Falun Gong may have been used to promote allegiance to himself. By unleashing a Mao-style movement against Falun Gong, Xing is forcing senior cadre to pledge allegiance to his line. The Washington Post reported that sources indicated not all of the Standing Committee of Politburo shared Xing's view that Falun Gong should be eradicated. Some suggest that there was not substantial resistance from the Politburo. There was This crackdown on Falun Gong reflects a historical effort by the Chinese Communist Party to eradicate religion, which the government believes is inherently subversive. The Chinese government protects 5 patriotic Communist Party-sanctioned religious groups. Unregistered religions that fall outside of state-sanctioned organizations are thus vulnerable to suppression. Any group that does not come under the control of the party is a threat. The party feels increasingly threatened by any belief system that challenges its ideology and has the ability to organize itself. The Falun Gong, whose belief system represents a revival of Chinese religion, was practiced by a large number of Communist Party members and members of the military, and was seen as particularly disturbing to Jiang Zemin. Jiang accepts the threat of the Falun Gong as an ideological one and spiritual beliefs against militant atheism and historical materialism. He wished to purge the military and government of any such beliefs. Well, there's a lot more of politics involved. Suggestions that there's a lot of perhaps interpolitical turmoil going on in the U.S. and this makes, or not in the U.S. but in China, and this makes a lot of sense that they would use something like this as a Maoist-style polarization effort. And obviously, especially when you have a homogenous society like that, as we know, as being exhibited here in the United States with the Muslims, certainly it's necessary for the state to have some sort of official enemy that it can persecute and point the population at and use as somehow a scapegoat for issues. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the torture and stuff that these guys are being subjected to in what they call the conversion program. Now, the regime aimed to be both covert. It wanted to. It didn't just want to dissolve and destroy the practice. It also wanted to provide a transformation of the practitioners. So in 2000, the party upped its campaign of sentencing practitioners to re-education through labor in an effort to have them renounce their beliefs and transform their thoughts. Terms were also arbitrarily extended by police, while some practitioners had ambiguous charges levied against them, such as disrupting social order, endangering national security, or subverting the socialist system. The majority of long-term Falun Gong detainees are processed administratively through this system instead of a criminal justice system. Upon completion of their re-education sentences, those practitioners who refuse to recant are then incarcerated in legal education centers set up by provincial authorities to transform minds. Sound like America coming? Much of the conversion program relied on Mao-style techniques of indoctrination and thought reform, where Falun Gong practitioners were organized to view anti-Falun Gong television programs and enroll in Marxism and materialism study sessions. Traditional Marxism and materialism were the core content of the sessions. The government-sponsored image of the conversion process emphasizes psychological persuasion and a variety of soft sell techniques. This is the ideal norm in regime reports. On the other hand, disturbing and sinister forms of coercion against practitioners who fail to renounce their belief. At least 14,474 cases are classified by different methods of torture. And Falun Gong agencies document over 63,000 individual cases of torture. Among them are cases of severe beatings, psychological torment, corporal punishment, and forced, intense, heavy burden labor and stress positions. Solitary confinement in squalid conditions, heat treatment, including burning and freezing, electric shocks delivered to sensitive parts of the body that may result in nausea, convulsions, or fainting, devastative force feeding, sticking bamboo strips into fingernails, deprivation of food, sleep, and use of toilet, rape, gang rape, asphyxiation, and threat, extortion, and termination of student status. The cases appear verifiable, and the great majority identify the individual practitioner, often with age, occupation, and residence. The time and location of the alleged abuse took place down to the level of district, township, village, and often specific jail institutions. And the names, rank, and number of alleged perpetrators. Many such reports include lists of names of witnesses and description of injuries. The publication of persistent, abusive, and often brutal behavior by named individuals with their official title, place, and times of torture suggests that there is no official will to cease such activities. Due to the difficulty in corroborating reports of torture deaths in China, estimates of the number of Falun Gong practitioners killed under persecution vary widely. In 2009, the New York Times reported that according to human rights groups, the repression had claimed at least 2,000 lives. Amnesty International said at least 100 Falun Gong practitioners had reportedly died in 2008. Calendar year, either in custody or shortly after their release. Falun Gong sources have documented over 3,700 deaths. Investigative journalists estimate 65,000 Falun Gong were killed for their organs from 2000 to 2008, based on extensive interviews, while researchers reported the source of 41,500 transplants for the 6-year period, 2000 to 2005, is unexplained. Let me repeat this. Investigative journalist Ether Gutman estimates that 65,000 Falun Gong were killed for their organs in 2000-2008 based on extensive interviews, while researchers David Kilgore and David Matas reported the source of 41,500 transplants for the 6-year period of 2000 to 2005 is unexplained. So this is official. The Chinese government officially does this. No one says anything. No one in the United States says anything. And this is done, and people are flying over there and getting kidneys and hearts and lungs and eyes and all of this sort of thing. And this is where it is coming from. This is a harvesting going on. This is evil. This is satanic. Clearly, this is satanic. I really don't know how else to describe it. Chinese authorities do not publish statistics on Falun Gong practitioners killed amidst the crackdown in individual cases. However, authorities have denied that deaths in custody were due to torture. Now, the report published in 2006 concluded that the government in China and its agencies in numerous parts of the country, in particular hospitals, but also detention centers and people's courts since 1999, have put to death a large but unknown number of Falun Gong prisoners of conscience. The report, which was based mainly on circumstantial evidence, called attention to the extremely short wait time for organs in China. 1 to 2 weeks for a liver, compared with 32.5 months in Canada. Noting that this was indicative of organs being procured on demand. It also tracked a significant increase in the number of annual organ transplants in China beginning in 1999. corresponding with the onset of the persecution of Falun Gong. Despite the very low levels of voluntary organ donation, China performs the second highest number of transplants per year. They also presented self-accusatory material from the Chinese Transplant Center websites advertising for the immediate availability of organs from living donors, and transcripts of interviews in which hospitals told prospective transplant recipients they could obtain Falun Gong organs. In May of 2008, two United States special reporters reiterated requests for the Chinese authority to respond to the allegations and to explain a source for the organs that would account for the sudden increase in organ transplants in China since 2000. Chinese officials have responded by denying the organ harvesting allegations and insisting that China abides by World Health Organization principles that prohibit the sale of human organs without written consent from donors. Responding to a U.S. House of Representatives resolution calling for an end to abusing transplant practices against religious and ethnic minorities, a Chinese embassy spokesman said, and I quote, "The so-called organ harvesting from death row prisoners is totally a lie fabricated by the Falun Gong." I'm just going to say, if you hold this belief that these people are evil, fuck you. That's all I could say. The United Nations Special Report on Torture said the Chinese government has yet to come clean and be transparent. It remains to be seen how it could be possible that organ transplant surgeries in Chinese hospitals have risen massively since 1999, while there are never that many voluntary donors available. Another journalist in 2014 published the results of his own investigation. He conducted extensive interviews with former detainees in a Chinese labor camp and prisons, as well as former security officers and medical professionals with knowledge of China's transplant practices. He reported that organ harvesting from political prisoners is likely began in the Xinjiang province in the 1990s and then spread nationwide. Gutman estimates that 64,000 Falun Gong prisoners may have been killed for their organs between the year of 2000 and 2008. In a 2016 report, they found that he had underestimated. In the new report, he found that the government's official estimates for the volume of organs harvested since the persecution of Falun Gong began to be 150,000 to 200,000. Media outlets have extrapolated from this study a death toll of 1.5 million people. Ethan Gutman estimates from this update that 60,000 to 110,000 organs are harvested in China annually, noting it is difficult but plausible to harvest 3 organs from a single body, and also calls harvest a new form of genocide using the most respected members of society. The Chinese government's campaign against Falun Gong was driven by large-scale propaganda through television, newspapers, radio, and internet. Within the first month of the crackdown, 400 articles attacking Falun Gong appeared in each of the main state-run papers, while primetime television replayed alleged exposés of the group, with no divergent views aired in the media. The propaganda campaign focused on allegations that Falun Gong jeopardized social stability, was deceiving and dangerous, was anti-science, and threatened progress, and argued that Falun Gong's moral philosophy was incompatible with a Marxist social ethic. Several months after Falun Gong was outlawed, China's central television's emerged evening news contained little but anti-Falun Gong rhetoric. The government operation was a study in all-out demonization. Falun Gong was compared to a rat crossing the street that everyone shouts out to squash. Another official said it would be a long-term, complex, and serious struggle to eradicate Falun Gong. State propaganda initially used the appeal of scientific rationalism to argue that Falun Gong's worldview was in complete opposition to science and communism. For example, the People's Daily asserted on the 27th of July, 1999, that the fight against Falun Gong was a struggle between theism and atheism, superstition and science, idealism and materialism. Let me repeat that, just so we know who the hell the bad guy is here. This is a struggle between theism and atheism, superstition and science, idealism and materialism. I don't know, if Satan was on one of those sides, I think it'd be easy to see which one that would be. Other editorials declared that Falun Gong's idealism and theism are absolutely contradictory to fundamental theories and principles of Marxism, that the truth, kindness, and forbearance principle preached by Falun Gong had nothing in common with socialist, ethical, and cultural progress we are striving to achieve. Suppressing Falun Gong was presented as a necessary step to maintaining the vanguard role of the Communist Party in Chinese society. Despite party efforts, initial charges leveled against Falun Gong failed to elicit popular widespread support for the persecution of the group. In months following July 1999, the rhetoric of state-run press escalated to include charges that Falun Gong was colluding with foreign anti-China forces. In October 1999, 3 months after the persecution began, the People's Daily newspaper claimed Falun Gong as a Sai Zhao, a direct translation term that is heretical teaching. But during the anti-Falun Gong propaganda campaign, it was rendered as an evil cult in English. In the context of Imperial China, the term Zhaijiao is used to refer to non-Confucian religions, though in the context of Communist China, it has been used to target religious organizations which do not submit to the authority of the Communist Party. Applying a cult label to the Falun Gong effectively cloaked the government's crackdown with the legitimacy of the West's anti-cult movement. However, Falun Gong does not satisfy common definitions of a cult. Its members marry outside the group, have outside friends, hold normal jobs, do not live isolated from society, do not believe that the world's end is imminent, and do not give significant amounts of money to the organization. It does not advocate violence, and at its heart is an apolitical, inward-oriented discipline, one aimed at cleansing oneself spiritually and improving one's health. The entire issue of the supposed cult nature of Falun Gong was a red herring from the beginning, cleverly exploited by the Chinese state to blunt the appeal of the Falun Gong. Because the Falun Gong was categorized in the popular perception as a apolitical Qigong exercise club, it was not seen as a threat to the government. The most critical strategy in the Falun Gong suppression campaign, therefore, was to convince people to reclassify the Falun Gong into a number of negatively charged religious labels like evil cult, sect, or superstition. The group's silent protests were reclassified as creating social disturbances. In this process of relabeling, the government was attempting to tap into a deep reservoir of negative feelings related to the historical role of quasi-religious cults as a destabilizing force in Chinese political history. A turning point in the propaganda campaign came on the eve of the Chinese New Year, July 23, 2001, when 5 people attempted to set themselves ablaze in Tiananmen Square. The official China press agency and other state medias asserted that the self-immolators were practitioners, though the Falun Gong Information Center disputed this on the grounds that the movement's teaching explicitly forbid suicide and killing. Further, alleging that this event was a cruel but clever piece of stunt work. The incident received international news coverage, and video footage of the burnings were broadcast later inside China by China Central Television. Images of a 12-year-old girl burning and interviews with other participants in which they stated their beliefs that self-immolation would lead them to paradise were shown. One of the CNN producers on the scene did not even see a child there. Falun Gong sources with other commentators pointed out that the main participants in which they stated their belief that account for wait, hold on a second here, I'm sorry. The main participants which stated that their self-immolation would lead to paradise were shown, but let me say, oh my God, I'm sorry. Okay, basically all of their behavior is inconsistent with Falun Gong teachings. Everyone agrees that this incident was staged by the government, and the 2 self-immolators who died were not actually Falun Gong practitioners. Somebody suddenly died after being very lively, after being deemed ready to leave the hospital and go home. Several had said that this was not a real threat and the state's crackdown had gone too far. After the event, however, the mainland Chinese media campaign against Falun Gong gained significant traction. As public sympathy for Falun Gong declined, the government began sanctioning systematic use of violence against the group. In the month following the Tiananmen Square incident, Jiang Zemin convened a rare Central Work Conference to stress the importance of continuity in the anti-Falun Gong campaign and unite senior party officials behind the effort. Under Jiang's leadership, the crackdown on Falun Gong became part of the Chinese political ethos of upholding stability. Much of the same rhetoric employed by the party during the Tiananmen incident in 1989, Jing's message was echoed at the 2001 National People's Conference, where the Falun Gong's eradication was tied to China's economic progress. Though less prominent in the national media, the persecution of Falun Gong was carried on long after Jiang retired. Successive high-level strike-hard campaigns against the Falun Gong were initiated in both 2008 and 2009. In 2010, a 3-year campaign was launched to renew attempts at the coercive transformation of Falun Gong practitioners. Anti-Falun Gong propaganda efforts have also permeated the Chinese education system. Following Jiang Zemin's 1999 ban on Falun Gong, then Minister of Education Chen Jil launched an active campaign to promote the party line on Falun Gong within all levels of academic institution, including graduate schools, universities, colleges, middle schools, primary schools, and kindergartens. Her efforts included a cultural revolution-like pledge in Chinese schools that required faculty members, staff, and students to publicly denounce Falun Gong. Teachers who did not comply with Chen's program were dismissed or detained. Uncooperative students were refused academic advancement, expelled from school, or sent to transformation camps to alter their thinking. Chen also worked to spread the anti-Falun Gong academic propaganda movement overseas, using domestic educational funding to donate aid to foreign institutions, encouraging them to oppose Falun Gong. Boy, that's got to make you look like a real idiot if you're not even Chinese and you're opposing Falun Gong. Makes you look like a real tool. Falun Gong's response to the persecution began in July of 1999 with appeals to local, provincial, and central petitioning offices in Beijing. It soon progressed to larger demonstration, with hundreds of Falun Gong practitioners traveling daily to Tiananmen Square to perform Falun Gong exercises or raise banners in defense of the practice. These demonstrations were invariably broken up by security forces, and the practitioners involved were arrested, sometimes violently, and detained. By the 25th of April 2000, a total of more than 30,000 practitioners had been arrested on the square. Sounds like the early days of Christianity, doesn't it? 700 Falun Gong followers were arrested during a demonstration in the square on the 1st of January 2001. Public protests continued well into 2001. A writer for the Wall Street Journal said that Falun Gong's faithful had mustered what is arguably the most sustained challenge to authority in 50 years of communist rule. By late 2001, demonstrations in Tiananmen Square had become less frequent, and the practice was driven deeper underground. As public protest fell out of favor, practitioners established underground material sites which would produce literature and DVDs to counter the portrayal of Falun Gong in the official media. Practitioners then distribute these materials, often door to door. Falun Gong sources estimated in 2009 that over 200,000 of such sites existed across China today. The production, possession, or distribution of these materials is frequently grounds for security agents to incarcerate or sentence Falun Gong practitioners. In 2002, Falun Gong activists in China tapped into television broadcasts, replacing regular state-run programming with their own content. One of the more notable instances occurred in 2002 when Falun Gong practitioners in the Changchun intercepted 8 cable television networks in Jin province and nearly for an hour televised a program titled Self-Immolation or a Staged Act. All 6 of the Falun Gong practitioners involved were captured over the next few months. 2 were killed immediately, while the other 4 were all dead by 2010 as the result of injuries sustained while imprisoned. Does that remind you of the movie V for Vendetta a little bit, perhaps? Only this is real life. You didn't hear about this, did you? Outside China, Falun Gong practitioners established international media organizations to gain wider exposure for their cause and challenge narratives of the Chinese state-run media. These include the Epoch Times newspaper, the New Tang Dynasty television, and Sound of Hope radio station. According to Zhao, though, Epoch Times, it can be discerned how Falun Gong is building a de facto media alliance with China's democracy movement in exile, as demonstrated by its frequent printing of articles by prominent overseas critics of the People's Republic of China government. In 2004, Epoch Times published a collection of 9 editorials which presented a critical history of the Communist Party. This catalyzed the Tuidang movement, which encourages Chinese citizens to renounce their affiliations with the Chinese Communist Party. including ex post facto renunciations of the Communist Youth League and Young Pioneers. The Epoch Times claims that tens of millions have renounced the Communist Party as part of the movement, though these numbers have not been independently verified. In 2007, Falun Gong practitioners in the United States formed Shenyun Performing Arts, a dance and music company that tours internationally. Falun Gong software developers in the United States are also responsible for the creation of several popular censorship circumvention tools employed by internet users in China. Falun Gong practitioners outside China have filed dozens of lawsuits against Zheng Zemin, Lao Gan, Bo Xili, and other Chinese officials alleging genocide and crimes against humanity. According to International Advocates for Justice, Falun Gong has filed the largest number of human rights lawsuits in the 21st century, and the charges are among the most severe international crimes defined by international criminal laws. As of 2006, 54 civil and criminal lawsuits were underway in 33 countries. In many instances, courts have refused to adjudicate the cases on the grounds of sovereign immunity. In the late 2009, however, separate courts in Spain and Argentina indicted Xing Xiaomen, Lu Gan, on charges of crimes of humanity and genocide and asked for their arrest. The ruling is acknowledged to be largely symbolic and unlikely to be carried out. The Court of Spain also indicted several others. Falun Gong practitioners and their supporters also filed a lawsuit in May 2011 against the technology company Cisco Systems, alleging that the company helped design and implement a surveillance system for the Chinese government to suppress Falun Gong. Cisco denies customizing their technology for this purpose. I call bullshit. Well, Li Hongzhi began teaching Falun Gong internationally in March 1995. His first stop was in Paris, where, at the invitation of the Chinese ambassador, he held a lecture seminar at the People's Republic of China Embassy. This was followed by lectures in Sweden in May of 1995, and between 95 and 99, he gave lectures in the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Switzerland, and Singapore. Falun Gong's growth outside of China largely corresponds to the migration of students from mainland China to the West in the early mid-1990s. Falun Gong associations and clubs began appearing in Europe, North America, and Australia, with activities centered mainly on university campuses. Falun Gong volunteers, instructors, and Falun Dafa associations are currently found in 80 countries outside China. The translation of Falun Gong teachings began appearing in the late 1990s, and as the practice began proliferating outside of China, Li Hongzhi was beginning to receive recognition in the United States and elsewhere in the Western world. In May of 1999, he was welcomed to Toronto with greetings from the city's mayor and the provincial lieutenant governor, and in 2 months that followed also received recognition from the cities of Chicago and San Jose. Although the practice was beginning to attract an overseas constituency in the 1990s, it remained relatively unknown outside China until the spring of 1999, when tensions between the Falun Gong and the Communist parties became subject of international media coverage. But with the increased attention, the practice gained a greater following outside of China. And following the campaign of the suppression of the group, the overseas presence became vital to the practice resistance in China and its continued survival. Falun Gong practitioners overseas have responded to the persecution in China through regular demonstrations, parades, and through the creation of media outlets. performing arts companies, censorship circumvention software mainly intended to reach mainland Chinese audiences. A body of scholarly work has been published on Falun Gong ever since it began. Most of these have been created by social scientists who investigate the social conditions that led to the creation of the movement. Obviously, since 1999, several Western governments and human rights organizations have expressed condemnation of the Chinese government's suppression of Falun Gong. And since 1999, members of the Congress have made public pronouncements and introduced several resolutions in support of Falun Gong. In 2010, the U.S. House of Representatives Resolution 605 called for immediate end to the campaign to persecute, intimidate, imprison, and torture Falun Gong practitioners, condemned the Chinese authorities' efforts to distribute false propaganda about the practice worldwide, and express sympathy to the persecuted Falun Gong practitioners and their families. From 1999 to 2001, Western media reports on Falun Gong, and in particular the mistreatments of practitioners, which were frequent if mixed. But these reports have declined. So Falun Gong has failed to receive the level of sympathy or sustained attention afforded to other Chinese dissident groups for unknown reasons. Most Americans are aware of suppression of the Tibetans, Buddhist, and unregistered Christian groups or pro-democracy free speech advocates, but they know nothing about China's assault on the Falun Gong. Apparently, the group suffers from some shortcoming in public relations, perhaps. Unlike the activists for the Tibetans, I guess what they need is a Dalai Lama. They don't have a Dalai Lama. Li Hongzhi doesn't make a good Dalai Lama. He's not quite as charismatic, I guess. I guess that's what they need. They also lack robust backing from American constituencies that usually support religious freedom. And their moral conservative beliefs have alienated some liberal constituencies in the West because of their stances against promiscuity and homosexual behavior. Christian conservatives, by contrast, they don't even give it the same space as the persecuted Chinese Christians. They don't want to punish human rights abuses so hard that it would disrupt commercial or political relations with China. So, that's it. In August 2007, at the request of the Falun Gong, the newly reestablished Rabbinic Sanhedrin deliberated persecution of the movement by the Chinese regime. So, there you go. The metaphor and the parallel between the persecution of the early Christians is clearly evident. And the negative rhetoric and hateful, polarizing lies that are being spread are clearly also directly related to the ancient rhetoric used by the dark side to suppress such groups that would promote righteous behavior and righteous thoughts. Well, I'm 30 minutes away from the end of the show. There's really not much left to tell you about this, but if you're interested, obviously, I certainly recommend you look into this. Friends of mine who have become involved in this have started practicing the exercises. I think it's mostly because these people are looking to achieve their supernatural powers. But as I preach on my program so often, ultimately that's what we do with this. That's exactly what we're doing on this show right now. Right? We're building our psychic skills. We are practicing service to others without the expectation of compensation. And we're doing our best to teach others and help others and save the world. So so much of what we do here on the radio and so many of the programs that we do here, I know tonight when Tony comes on, he'll probably be talking about the same thing to a large degree. And that has to do with the what comes out of our mouth, the power of what comes out of our mouth, and our actions and our example that we put out. Again, I did this show because of a show that someone else did where a person who was pretending to be a Qigong practitioner condemned the Falun Gong group as being evil, and obviously there's nothing evil about it. Clearly, there's hardly anything religious about it. It's just goodness. That's all it is. It's just being moral and righteous. Has nothing to do with any kind of controlled system. It's not even Buddhism. It's more of a just living properly. And there's really nothing wrong with that. So I think all of us that are righteous and endeavor to do the right thing are doing nothing different that these people aren't doing, and that everything that we try to preach, if you will, is very similar to what is being shown here. Obviously, the use of the Falun symbol or the swastika certainly is poison to the dark side, which apparently also includes the Zionists, who apparently are probably also very much involved with this persecution, I would suspect. But the enemy of my enemy is my friends. And certainly the Communist Chinese government is the enemy. And if you look at the current situation in Russia, we see a resurgence of Christianity and moral growth and the concept of doing the right thing in righteousness and supporting the people and protecting the people, not poisoning the people, unlike we see here in the West, which is completely satanic, evil, and designed to slowly poison and destroy the very people that make up the country, because that is what a satanic group does. It destroys itself, destroys the entire world. It hates humanity. Clearly, the world is a grip of the dark evil powers such as this. And to have persecution of this nature being done on an organized level to a group that would preach truth, compassion, and forbearance is clearly demonic. Now, as I've said, in the world today, the geopolitical arena, we find the United States being poised against both Russia as well as China. But I would suggest that Russia would never have formed any sort of alliance with China had not the NATO, the EU, and the United States and the Zionist Rothschild banking cabal forced it into this situation. I think that is ultimately going to be a bad thing for Russia, and I believe that Putin knows this. Some people have suggested that Russia has been thrown into the arms of China, or that China has been thrown into the arms of Russia. I don't think so. I think we pushed Russia. But either way, ultimately, China is the one that is embracing the worst parts of the Marxist socialist agenda. And the current leadership of that country today is clearly evil. Not saying that they're worse than what we have here in the United States, but obviously very much the same. Now, I didn't get to take a break, and that's unfortunate because I need to drink something really badly, and I'm not going to be able to. And I do have 20 minutes, which is way too soon to stop. Now, I don't know if anybody wants to call in, but now would be a good time to do it if you'd like to. If there's anyone out there that has any questions about this, please give me a call. Either through the Skype or through the phone. And, of course, the phone is 714-598-3125. I can't even walk into the kitchen to grab something because I'm using the condenser mic, which is attached to the desk, so I can't walk away from it. Anyway. But really, that is it. Now, obviously, a lot of this is going on, as you know, right now, and clearly nobody's talking about it. The very fact that I'm talking about it right now is probably an aberration, because the only reason I mentioned it is because somebody claiming to have been involved in the practice of Qigong denounced it, and that kind of shocked me, and it showed me just how important it is to actually put out some positive messages in support of this group, which I view as cat fight going on behind me. Darn it. I gotta get involved. Uh-oh. Shoot. This is not good. Sorry. Oh. All right, guys, I apologize. I have got to go take care of these kitty cats. Oh, I don't know what happened. Oh, I really apologize. Anyway, this is Stephen Kelly. This is the Stephen D. Kelly Show. Stay tuned. There's going to be some musical delay, and then Tony Pazik will be up immediately. He's online right now. He must be listening. Stand by, Tony. I've got to take care of some terrible things going on behind me. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and bring up some music right now. So let me get that queued up. I've got to go run and take care of these kitties. Here we go. Will this work? And of course, I have to go through Excel first. Oh my gosh. All right, guys.